Thomas Whitfield Hayes did not realize he had already been pushed out of his own life until the morning he drove to his workshop and found the locks had been changed overnight. For 32 years, he had believed he was building a family. For the last 18 months, his wife and stepson had been quietly building something else. Signature by signature, account by account, until the man who had spent half his life turning other people's ruined buildings back into homes was left at 62 with a pickup truck, a toolbox, and $14,000. What he did not yet know was that 2 hours north of Nashville, an abandoned small-town bank was about to change hands for $13,000. And behind its sealed vault door, something his grandfather had left for him 4 decades earlier was still waiting to be opened. If this story finds you at the right moment, stay with it until the end. And if you like stories about loss, quiet strength, and the things time cannot erase, leave a like and subscribe to the channel so the next story finds its way to you. The morning it happened, Thomas set out from the house a little earlier than usual. A customer in Brentwood had called the night before about a water-damaged floor. He drove the same old Ford pickup he had driven for 17 years. But when he pulled up at the workshop on Moreland Avenue, the lot was empty. The side gate Thomas had hung with his own hands in 2003 had been closed with a new silver padlock. And on the main door, the keypad Thomas had punched the same 4 digits into for 14 years no longer accepted his code. He stood in front of that door for nearly 10 minutes, long enough for the first cold light of October to lift over the roofline. Then he pulled out his phone and called home. Caroline did not answer. Evan did. "You should not have come in today, Thomas." His stepson's voice was even, neither angry nor apologetic. The voice of a man reading aloud from a page he had prepared in advance. "The paperwork went through yesterday afternoon. Mom and I thought it would be easier this way. There is a folder on the dining room table with everything you need to know." Thomas said nothing. Behind Evan's voice, he could hear the house in Decatur waking up. The coffee machine. The dog. The quiet opening of a cabinet. "What paperwork, Evan?" he said finally. "The workshop, the accounts, the equipment lease. A few other things. Mom will explain. When I come home tonight." "Mom and I think it would be best if you do not come back to the house, Thomas. Your things are in the garage. The truck is yours." The call ended before Thomas could answer. He sat in the truck for 40 minutes with the engine off. He had been a contractor for more than 30 years. He had walked into houses after fires, after floods, after the floor had collapsed under the previous owner's feet. He had learned early that when something has gone wrong on this scale, the first thing a man must do is stand still and take an honest inventory before reaching for any tool. He drove back at the end of the day only to pick up the things left for him in the garage. 2 suitcases already packed, a cardboard box with his mother's old papers, and the small wooden crucifix from her nightstand. The toolbox, a folder on the dining table. Thomas opened the folder once in the driveway. He read only far enough to see that the workshop was no longer in his name, that the house was no longer in his name, that the joint accounts had been reconsolidated under Caroline Hayes alone. He closed the folder. He did not open it again for 9 days. Caroline had not come out to the driveway. The light in the front kitchen window stayed on the whole time Thomas stood on the concrete loading the last box. He had built the cabinets under that window with his own hands, the summer after they were married, when Evan had been 8 years old. That memory did not bring anger. It brought a flat, clear feeling he had no word for. He closed the tailgate. He did not go back inside. For 12 days, Thomas lived out of the cab of the truck. He slept in rest areas along I-75. He counted the money 3 times a day. $14,000, $13,800, $13,400. Each withdrawal he logged in the small notebook he had once used for material purchases. On the third Tuesday, he crossed into Tennessee. The next morning, he turned off the interstate onto an old state highway. Around 11, he came into Clements Ford. It was a small Tennessee town set against the southern edge of the Cumberland Plateau. Population just under 1,800. A single main street. A feed and seed, a diner, a post office, a hardware store, a Baptist church. And at the far end of Maine, just before the road bent back toward the river, a 2-story limestone building set slightly taller than everything around it. The building had an arched front doorway framed in heavy oak. Above the door, carved into the stone lintel in a long faded relief, were the words Clements Ford Bank and Trust, Estate 1911. The windows on the ground floor were boarded from the inside. Pinned to the inside of the front door was a hand-lettered sign, For Sale by Owner, a phone number beneath it. Thomas pulled the truck over and cut the engine. He sat behind the wheel looking at that building for nearly 20 minutes. Someone else might have seen a ruin. He saw a skeleton built by a generation that still understood stone, and he saw that skeleton had not yet been given up on. He wrote down the number. The woman who answered was older than he had expected. Her name was Margaret Lark. Her father had been the last manager of Clements Ford Bank and Trust before it had been absorbed by a regional institution in 1968. The bank had never reopened under the new ownership. Her father had kept the building and later passed it to her when he died in 1988. "It has been closed 56 years, Mr. Hayes," she said. "Nothing inside has been touched the way it should have been touched." "Nothing?" "My father locked the vault the day the new company took the accounts. The safe deposit holders were supposed to come and collect what they had left. Most came. A few never did. My father kept their things in there because no one ever told him to do anything different. After he died, I did not have it in me to disturb them." Thomas asked her the price. She named $17,000. He told her he had 13. The line was quiet for a long breath. "Are you a developer, Mr. Hayes?" "No, ma'am. I am a contractor. I have restored old buildings for 32 years. Are you going to tear it down?" "No, ma'am. I am going to live in it." She was quiet again. Then she said, "Come to my house at 2 o'clock this afternoon. We will see." Margaret Lark was 79 years old. She received him in a front parlor that smelled faintly of lemon oil and old newspaper. She did not ask why a man of his age was driving a pickup through Tennessee with everything he owned in the bed. $13,000, she said, on the condition that what is inside the vault stays where my father left it until someone who knew him has a chance to tell you what is in there. His attorney is still alive, though not by much. Thomas agreed. They signed the papers 2 days later. Margaret handed him a heavy iron ring with 7 keys on it. The oldest key, the key to the vault, was separate from the others. "This one my father held the longest," she said. "I have never turned it." That night, Thomas slept inside the building for the first time. He laid his bedroll on the polished marble floor of the old lobby, under a row of brass teller cages gone dark green with patina. He slept the way a man sleeps after he has finally stopped moving. On the third day, Margaret Lark's attorney arrived from Knoxville. His name was Everett Payne. He was 84 years old and walked with a cane carved from sweet gum. The two men sat in the manager's office. Everett Payne drank 1 cup of coffee and then set his cane flat across his lap. "Mr. Hayes, before you put a key in that door, there are a few things about this bank you should know. Not for the sake of the building, for the sake of the people who trusted it." Thomas listened. In 1934, in the middle of the Depression, this bank was on the edge of closing. Half the farms in this county had missed 2 mortgage payments, and by the numbers, most of them should have been foreclosed on. The manager at the time, a man named Whitfield Hayes, made a very unusual decision. He began accepting items of personal value as collateral: watches, rings, family Bibles, a violin, in some cases a deed to a small back parcel of land. He did not record these items against the loan. He simply held them. He called the arrangement an honor hold. The debt stayed on the books at face value. The item stayed in the vault. Thomas had set his coffee cup down on the desk when Everett Payne had said the name Whitfield Hayes. He had not picked it up again. "I'm sorry," Thomas said. "You said the manager's name was what?" "Whitfield Hayes. He was a junior loan officer, but the senior man was ill for most of 1934 and 1935, and Whitfield was effectively running this building for almost 2 years. He stayed on until 1961. He died in 1962. Thomas looked down at his hands on the desk. "My grandfather's name was Whitfield Hayes," he said. "I never met him. My father and he had a falling out before I was born. My father did not speak about him." Everett Payne did not answer right away. He took off his glasses and set them on the desk. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "I think we had better open that vault together." The vault was not large, 9 feet deep, 7 feet wide. Along 3 walls, safe deposit boxes, perhaps 120 boxes in total. Most of them hung slightly open, their contents already collected in the final weeks of 1968. 19 boxes remained closed. In the center of the vault, on a waist-high table bolted to the floor, were 3 old ledger books, bound in dark leather. Everett Payne reached for the top ledger. He turned to the first page. "This is the honor hold book," he said. "Every item your grandfather accepted was written down here. Every loan, every family, every date." The writing was in black fountain ink, slightly faded but perfectly legible. The handwriting was careful, unhurried, almost architectural in its straightness. Every line recorded a name, a date, a loan amount, and an item held. Some entries bore the word returned, some bore the word forgiven. A few bore the word unclaimed, followed by a box number. There were more than 400 entries across the 3 ledgers. A little over half had been marked returned. A little under a third had been marked forgiven, meaning the loan had been quietly written off and the item returned anyway. The rest, 71 entries, were unclaimed. And 71 items were still in this vault, locked inside 71 boxes for the last 56 years. Everett Payne turned to the last page of the 3rd ledger. There was a single entry dated March 14, 1962, written in a different hand, a woman's hand. "Whitfield Hayes passed this morning. Items preserved. To be held until his grandson Thomas Whitfield Hayes attains majority. See box 47. Thomas read that line 3 times. His breath was steady. "Box 47, he said. Everett Payne nodded. He reached into his inside coat pocket and produced a small brass key, darkened with age, a paper tag tied to it by a piece of cotton string. The tag read, in the same tight woman's hand, Hayes, 47. "My predecessor gave me this key in 1971, Everett Payne said. He had been holding it for the man before him. He told me that if a man named Thomas Whitfield Hayes ever came to the door of this building, the key was to be placed in his hand. It had been promised to your grandmother, Adele Hayes. She outlived your grandfather by 18 years. My grandmother died in 1980. I was 18 that year. Yes, Mr. Hayes, she died 3 weeks before your 18th birthday." Thomas took the key. Box 47 was in the lower row, second from the left. Thomas knelt on the marble floor. He turned the key. The small brass door opened without resistance, as though it had been waiting to be opened and was in no hurry to celebrate the fact. Inside the box were 4 things. A savings passbook in his own name, opened on his date of birth, January 9, 1962, 4 weeks before his grandfather's death. The first deposit was $50. Regular deposits had been made quarterly by Adele Hayes until her death. A note in Everett Payne's handwriting indicated the account had been preserved in dormancy under the state's unclaimed property statutes. The current balance was just over $71,000. A small velvet box containing a woman's wedding ring, a gold band set with a single small garnet. A note in Adele's handwriting explained that the ring had been her mother's and her mother's mother's before that. An envelope containing the deeds to 2 parcels of land, 34 acres in total, along the bend of the Little Harpeth River just outside Clements Fort. The parcels had been accepted as honor hold in 1937 and 1941 from 2 families that had later left the county and never returned. The bank had transferred those deeds to Whitfield Hayes personally in 1961 in recognition of his unrecovered contributions during the crisis years. And the letter. The letter was 4 pages long, written in Whitfield's careful hand, dated February 28, 1962. Addressed across the top to Thomas Whitfield Hayes, grandson. Thomas read it in the vault, sitting on the marble floor. He read it twice. The first time quickly, because he did not yet believe what he was reading. The second time slowly, the way a man reads something he understands he will be reading for the rest of his life. The letter did not speak about the money, or the ring, or the land. Whitfield had written those things into the logbook and considered them self-explanatory. The letter spoke about the honor hold. It spoke about how a bank could either be the place that took the last thing a family had, or the place that held it safely until the family could come back for it. At the end of the letter, Whitfield had written a single paragraph addressed directly to Thomas. I do not know what kind of man you will grow into. I hope only this, that if what is in this box ever comes into your hands, you will understand that none of it was the thing I meant to leave you. The thing I meant to leave you is the book. Read the book. Find the names. Find what is left of the families. Return what is theirs. You do not owe these people anything, but I did. And in a house where I could not be the grandfather you deserved, the only thing I can ask of you is that you finish what I did not have time to finish. Everything else is only paper. Thomas set the letter down on his knee. He stayed in the vault for a long while. Everett Payne did not move from the doorway. When Thomas stood up, he folded the letter along its original creases and placed it back in box 47. He kept the key. Mr. Payne, he said, I would appreciate your help locating some of these families. Everett Payne inclined his head. I was hoping you would ask. The first returns took almost 3 weeks. Thomas worked with Everett Payne and with Clara Dennison, the county historian. Together, they cross-referenced the 71 unclaimed entries against county death records, marriage records, and the slow memory of older residents. Of the 71 families, 42 had descendants who could still be located within a 2-hour drive. The first return was to Althea Wexler Cooper, 72 years old, who lived in a small yellow house 2 blocks off Main. Her grandfather had pawned a pocket watch in the spring of 1936. On the inside of the case was a small engraving, for C.W. from A.W. 1898. When Thomas set it on a kitchen table, she did not pick it up for nearly a minute. Then she reached for it with the slow, careful motion of a woman who had learned early not to expect things to still be there when she arrived. She asked how much she wanted for it. He told her nothing. She asked him why. He told her his grandfather had held it for her family and that it was not his to sell. He returned each item this way, in kitchens, in front yards, on porches, a Civil War officer's sword, a woman's christening gown, a leather-bound family Bible with births and deaths recorded inside the cover going back to 1804, a carpenter's brace with a name carved into the handle, word spread, In a town of 1,800, it could not do otherwise. By the 4th week, Thomas was no longer a stranger on Main Street. By the 6th week, the owner of the hardware store had begun setting aside reclaimed oak for him at cost. By the 8th week, a retired teacher named Hollis Varn had begun coming by the old bank every other afternoon with a thermos of coffee, because her grandmother had been the woman who wrote the final entry in Whitfield's last ledger on the morning of March 14, 1962. Thomas began the restoration in parallel. The boarded windows came down. The oak door frame was restored. The marble floor was hand-polished. The brass teller cages were cleaned with cotton and vinegar, 1 bar at a time. The building did not become a bank again. Thomas converted the old records room into a small apartment for himself. He converted the lobby into something else, a room where people could come to leave things that ought to be held safely until the right hands came back for them. Behind the refurbished teller counter, he hung the 3 ledgers in a glass case. He left a small card beside it, printed in plain type. This book belongs to Clemens Ford. Read it with care. In the 9th week, on a cold afternoon in late November, a black sedan with Atlanta plates pulled up in front of the bank. Thomas was in the lobby, refinishing the 4th of the 6 customer desks along the east wall. He did not look up when the bell above the front door rang. He only looked up when the footsteps stopped 8 feet from the desk and did not come any closer. Evan was standing there. He was wearing the dark wool coat he had worn to Thomas's 60th birthday dinner 2 years earlier. He was holding a manila folder against his chest, the way a man holds a folder when he has rehearsed both the handing of it over and the retreating from it. "Thomas," Evan said. "Evan," Thomas set the sanding block down on the edge of the desk. He wiped his hands slowly on the cotton cloth tucked into his belt. "Mom sent me," Evan said finally. "She said I needed to come." "Your mother sent you for a reason." "Yes." "Say it." Evan looked around the lobby. The refinished marble, the polished teller cages, the glass case with the ledgers, the light coming in through the tall front windows that had been boarded only 9 weeks earlier. "We heard about the land," Evan said, "the parcels on the Little Harpeth. There is a developer in Nashville who has been looking at that stretch of the river. Mom had our attorney run the title history. She believes there is a reasonable marital claim." Thomas looked at him for a long moment. "Evan, sit down." "I do not need to sit down." "Sit down." Evan sat down, slowly, on the edge of one of the customer chairs along the east wall. Thomas pulled up a second chair and sat across from him. He did not lean forward. He did not raise his voice. "The deeds to that land," Thomas said, "were given to my grandfather in 1961, 1 year before I was born. The property was placed in my grandmother's hold in 1962 for me specifically. They have been in a safe deposit box in this building for 44 years. They were not acquired during any marriage, not mine, not anyone else's. They are not marital property, Evan. Your attorney will tell you that the second she looks at the chain of title, and so will Mr. Everett Payne, whose name is on every page of that chain. If your mother wishes to pursue this, she is free to do so. But I would like you to tell her this for me. Tell her I have let her have the workshop. I have let her have the house. I have let her have the accounts. I did not fight for any of it. I will fight for this. Not for what it is worth, for what it is." Evan did not answer for a little while. "Thomas," he said at last, "I did not think it would go this way." "No," Thomas said, "I know you didn't. It was not supposed to be what it became. I know that too." The bell above the door rang again. An older couple came in with a small wooden box between them, wrapped in a red cloth. They saw that Thomas was occupied and stood respectfully near the front. Hollis Varn, reading the newspaper at the far end of the lobby, stood up and went to greet them quietly on his behalf. Thomas turned back to Evan. "I will not be handing over the deeds, Evan, and I will not be sending your mother anything more than I have already sent her, which is silence. Tell her that plainly. I do not think she has ever known what to do with silence, but she will have to learn." Evan nodded once. he did not argue. He looked around the lobby one more time, and for the first time Thomas saw something pass across his stepson's face that Thomas recognized, because he had seen it on his own face 9 weeks earlier. The slow, clear understanding of a man who has just realized that the thing he came for was not the thing that was going to be decided by this conversation. "I should go," Evan said quietly. Thomas walked him to the door. Across Main Street, the light in the diner's window was yellow and steady. "Take care of yourself, Thomas." "You too, Evan." Evan got in the sedan. The car pulled away from the curb and turned south at the end of Main. Thomas watched the taillights until they disappeared behind the old Fidenseed. Then he turned back inside. The older couple was waiting in the middle of the lobby. They had come, they explained, because Holly Svarn had told them about the book, and because their grandmother had owned a quilt that had been pawned at this bank in 1940. Thomas led them across the lobby to the glass case. He opened it. He turned to 1940. 2 entries down the left-hand page, in his grandfather's unhurried hand, was the name of their family. An entry for 1 double wedding ring quilt, accepted against a loan of $47. A second column noted its location. Box 29. Thomas excused himself, walked back to the vault, and returned 3 minutes later with the quilt folded in white cotton cloth. The woman opened it on one of the customer desks. The quilt was old, the colors had softened, but the stitching was still tight. She pressed her hand flat against the surface of it for a long moment without speaking. "My grandmother made this," she said finally, "with her sister, in 1923. I have never seen it." Thomas nodded. He did not say anything. He did not need to. When they had gone, carrying the quilt carefully between them, Thomas walked back to the customer desk. He picked up the sanding block. He began again, along the grain of the pale oak, in the same unhurried motion he had learned from his father, who had learned it from a man Thomas had never met. Outside, the late November light was beginning to lay itself across the roof of the old bank in the low copper way it does along the Cumberland Plateau. Somewhere in the building, Holly Svarn was quietly brewing another pot of coffee. The bell above the front door would ring again soon. It always did, now. The thing his grandfather had left him, Thomas understood now, was not the money, and not the ring, and not the land. It was a place where something that had been taken could still be quietly given back. He worked on the desk until the light failed. Then he walked back to the small apartment he had built from the old records room. He lit the wood stove. He sat down in the reading chair by the window. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall on the roof of the hardware store across the alley. A life had been taken from him in the spring. A different life had been waiting for him on a stone lintel carved in 1911, behind the vault door his grandfather had closed almost 62 years earlier. But the grandson had come, and the book, at last, was being read. If you have stayed with this story all the way here, thank you for giving your time to a journey that was not loud, but patient enough to change the shape of a man's life. Some things are taken very clearly. Houses, accounts, names on deeds. But there are also things no amount of paperwork can ever reach, because they were placed somewhere long before the paperwork was drawn. If this story reminded you of someone who needs to hear it, share it with them. And if you would like to walk through another story like this one, leave a sign so the next one finds its way to you.